I don't think I need to tell you that people like me face struggles because of extra weight throughout our entire lives. From the very beginning, society teaches you that your space in this world is something you have to apologize for. You learn to walk softly, to wear dark colors, and to become as small as possible in a room, even when your body tells a different story. For 40 years, I lived in a state of hiding. I hid behind baggy sweaters, behind the kitchen counter, and eventually behind the role of the reliable grandmother. I believed the lie that my weight was a barrier between me and the world, and especially between me and intimacy. I thought that to be desired, you had to be thin, firm, and young. And since I was none of those things, I simply turned off that part of my soul. But at 75, something shifted. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time, I didn't see extra pounds or flaws. I saw a woman who had survived 75 years of life, who had carried children, who had weathered storms, and whose skin was a map of every laugh and every tear. I realized that my weight wasn't a cage, it was just part of the house I lived in. I'm telling you this because we are raised with this idea that a woman's worth has an expiration date, and that weight speeds up the clock. But the real secret to intimacy at my age didn't come from a diet or a miracle cream. It came from the moment I stopped asking for permission to exist in the body I have. This is the story of how I finally came home to myself. For decades, my marriage followed a quiet, predictable script. My husband is a good man, but like many men of his generation, he learned to see me as a function rather than a woman. I was the one who made the coffee, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, and the one who kept the house running like clockwork. In the process, the woman he once looked at with fire in his eyes slowly dissolved into the background. We became roommates who shared a mortgage and a set of children. But the bedroom door felt like a boundary to a world that no longer belonged to us. I used to think he stopped looking at me because I had grown too big. I convinced myself that my soft edges and the extra weight on my hips were a wall he couldn't climb over. I was so ashamed of my body that I started going to bed earlier just so he wouldn't see me undress. I became a master of shadows, changing in the dark, turning away from his touch before he even reached out, convinced that rejection was inevitable. I was the one who decided I was undesirable long before he ever said a word. But the silence in a long marriage can be a slow poison. We lived together for 45 years, yet there were moments when the distance between us in that king-size bed felt like an ocean. I realized that by hiding my body, I was also hiding my soul. I was waiting for him to fix me with a compliment, to tell me I was still beautiful despite the scales, while I was busy treating my own skin like an enemy territory. I had become a ghost in my own master bedroom, haunted by the memory of the thin, young girl I used to be. One evening, after another silent dinner, I sat at the edge of the bed and looked at my reflection in the darkened window. I realized that if I waited for the world, or even my husband, to give me back my dignity, I would be waiting until my last breath. The intimacy secret wasn't about him finding me attractive again. It was about the terrifying realization that I had stopped being a participant in my own life. I had to decide, would I remain a ghost or would I finally turn on the light? The change didn't start with a grand romantic gesture or a dramatic confrontation. It started with a small, quiet act of rebellion. One Tuesday morning, I went out and bought a dress. It wasn't a slimming black dress meant to hide my shape, and it wasn't a practical housecoat designed for chores. It was a deep silk emerald green that felt cool against my skin. For 40 years, I had chosen clothes that whispered, "Ignore me." This dress shouted, "I am here." I stood in the middle of our bedroom, the bright daylight streaming in, and I didn't turn off the lights. I didn't pull the curtains. I looked at my reflection, the softness of my stomach, the width of my hips, the weight I had carried as a shield for so long. And for the first time in my life, I didn't apologize to the mirror. I realized that my body hadn't failed me by getting older or heavier. It had protected me. It had birthed 3 children, survived surgeries, and held me up through decades of labor. My body wasn't an ornament. It was my history. When my husband walked in and saw me standing there in that green silk, he stopped in his tracks. There was a long, heavy silence. I expected him to ask where I was going or what the occasion was, but instead, he just looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years. He didn't see the weight I was so terrified of. He saw a woman who had finally decided to occupy her own skin. That was the moment I understood the first part of the secret. Intimacy doesn't begin in the dark, and it doesn't begin with someone else's approval. It begins with the audacity to be seen. I had spent half a century waiting for the world to tell me I was enough before I would allow myself to feel desire. But that morning, in a green dress at 75, I decided that being enough was no longer up for debate. I was alive, I was present, and I was done being invisible. True intimacy at 75 doesn't look like a movie scene. It is much quieter, much more raw, and surprisingly more honest. Once I stopped hiding my body under layers of shame and oversized fabric, the air in our house changed. It wasn't just about a green dress. It was about the way I walked into a room. I stopped pulling away when my husband's hand brushed against mine in the kitchen. I stopped making myself small. And when the evening came, for the first time in years, I didn't wait for the darkness to protect me. I realized that we had both been starving for touch, but we were both afraid of the rules. We thought that because we weren't firm or fast anymore, that our bodies were somehow broken. But that night, as we sat together, I realized that my weight, the very thing I thought made me unlovable, actually held a different kind of beauty. My soft skin was a comfort, not a failure. My curves were a landing place, not a burden. Intimacy isn't about perfection. It's about the courage to let another person see the truth of your existence without an apology. We had to learn a new language. We had to move past the physical awkwardness of aging and the insecurities I had carried for 40 years. It wasn't about fixing the extra pounds. It was about finally accepting that my husband wasn't looking for a 20-year-old girl. He was looking for me, the woman who had walked beside him for almost half a century. When I finally stopped treating my body like a secret I had to keep from him, he finally felt invited back into my life. The secret I discovered is that desire doesn't die when you reach a certain size or a certain age. It only dies when you decide you are no longer worthy of it. By claiming my space, I gave him permission to see me again. We spent so many years living like polite strangers, afraid to acknowledge the changes in our bodies. But that night, in the quiet glow of a single lamp, we realized that the most intimate thing you can ever do is simply show up as you are, full, soft, wrinkled, and completely alive. When you change the way you see yourself at 75, the world around you starts to feel uncomfortable. My adult children were the first to notice. For years, I had been the safe grandmother, the one who wore beige cardigans, sat quietly in the corner during birthdays, and never had an opinion that caused a ripple. They were used to a version of me that was a selfless, genderless provider. When I started wearing bright colors, using red lipstick, and spending more time out of the house with my husband, I saw the confusion in their eyes. It was as if I was breaking a silent contract I never signed. There is a strange expectation that once a woman reaches a certain weight and age, she should settle down and stop being a woman altogether. My daughter once asked me with a hint of worry, "Mom, don't you think that outfit is a bit much for your age?" What she really meant was, "Mom, you're making us notice you as a person, and we preferred you as a background." They wanted me to stay in the box of grandma, where I was predictable and invisible. But I realized that I had spent 40 years being appropriate for everyone else, and all it got me was a hollow heart and a closet full of clothes I hated. The intimacy secret isn't just about a partner. It's about the intimacy you have with your own life. I had to learn to stand my ground when my family tried to pull me back into my old roles. I had to show them that my extra weight and my white hair didn't mean I was finished. I wasn't just a caregiver or a cook. I was a woman with a pulse, with desires, and with a right to a private life that didn't include them. It felt like a second adolescence, standing up for my right to be too much instead of just enough. The truth is, society loves a noble aging woman, one who suffers in silence and disappears into her service to others. But there is nothing noble about erasing yourself. When I finally stopped apologizing for my curves and my choices, I gave my children a gift I didn't expect. I showed them that they don't have to fear getting old. I showed them that life doesn't end when the mirror changes. By refusing to be invisible, I forced them to see me, not as a function, but as a human being who still has a lot of living left to do. The real truth about aging and weight isn't found in a magazine. It's found in the quiet moments when you finally stop fighting yourself. For 75 years, I treated my body like a problem that needed solving. I thought my extra weight was a wall that kept love out. But the intimacy secret I discovered is this: love doesn't need a perfect shape. It needs a person who is actually present. When I stopped hiding, I finally gave my husband and myself someone to actually hold on to. Softness isn't a failure of will. It is the evidence of a life that has been lived, felt, and survived. At 75, I am not too much. I am exactly who I am supposed to be. My husband and I have found a new kind of closeness, one that isn't based on youth, but on the profound relief of being truly seen. We don't turn off the lights anymore because there is nothing left to be ashamed of. If you are sitting there today feeling invisible because of your age or your weight, I want you to know that your story isn't over. You are not a before photo waiting to happen. You are a woman right now, and you are allowed to be desired, to be bold, and to come home to yourself. If this story resonated with you, I have a small request. Please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. This isn't just for me. The YouTube algorithm works in a way that your engagement helps this video reach another woman who might be sitting in the dark right now, feeling like she has disappeared. Your like or your comment could be the reason she realizes she isn't alone. Let's help each other stay visible. Thank you for listening to My Truth. And remember, it is never, ever too late to turn on the light.